How Resident Evil's mold remembers the dead. Ethan Winters dies near the beginning of Resident Evil 7. Then he wakes up, escapes the Baker estate, and spends 2 games treating dismemberment like an inconvenience. The mold explains his body, but its stranger ability is memory. It can record minds, preserve the dead, and rebuild people from stored information, which means Resident Evil may have invented an afterlife with a fungal terms of service agreement. What Miranda found underground? The factual answer starts with a distinction the games do not always make easy. The mold in Louisiana and the megamycete in Eastern Europe are related, but they are not exactly the same organism operating at the same scale. Mother Miranda discovers the megamycete beneath a village after the Spanish flu kills her daughter Eva. Overcome with grief, she enters a cave intending to die and comes into contact with the enormous fungal root. The organism infects her. It gives her regenerative abilities, extended life, and control over her biology. More importantly, Miranda discovers that the megamycete absorbs and preserves information from organisms within its reach. She believes Eva's consciousness exists inside it. That belief becomes the purpose of Miranda's life. She studies the organism, develops the Kadu parasite, experiments on villagers, and searches for a host capable of receiving Eva's stored consciousness. The 4 village lords are not adopted children in any healthy sense. They are failed vessel candidates. Alcina Dimitrescu gains regeneration but needs blood to control her condition. Karl Heisenberg can manipulate magnetic fields but hates Miranda. Salvatore Moreau mutates severely. Donna Beneviento develops hallucinatory control through infected plants and dolls. Miranda evaluates each one according to a single question. Can this body become Eva? The answer is no. Then she learns about Rose Winters. Rose is the child of Ethan and Mia. Ethan's body is entirely composed of mold by this point, and Mia has survived prolonged infection by Eveline's E-Series organism. Rose is born with an extraordinary connection to the fungal network and abilities beyond Miranda's other subjects. Miranda decides Rose is the ideal vessel. This is where the memory storage concept stops being background lore and becomes the central plot of Village. Miranda does not merely want to imitate Eva's appearance. She believes the megamycete can transfer Eva's consciousness into Rose's body. The plan depends on memory being biological material. To see how that works, we need to go back to Eveline, the child built to infect. The Connections, a criminal organization developing biological weapons, obtained fungal material and knowledge connected to Miranda's research. Using that lineage, it created an E-Series weapon designed to infiltrate a target population. Eveline appears to be a child, but she is a bioorganic weapon engineered to infect people with mold and establish control over them. Her desire for a family is partly emotional conditioning, created to support that role. Unlike a tyrant, Eveline does not need to smash through a military base. She can enter as a vulnerable girl, infect people, alter their perceptions, and make them protect her. The mold grows through a host's body and nervous system. Infection reports in Resident Evil 7 explain that affected brains become tuned to the E-Series asset. Victims experience hallucinations, hear Eveline's voice, and gradually lose their sense of self as her influence increases. This is not simple telepathy. The infected people are connected through a shared biological medium. Eveline can send information into that medium. She can make Jack and Marguerite Baker perceive her as family. She can pressure Mia to obey. She can appear as a child even when her physical body has aged into an old woman. She can use hallucinations to distort what victims see, and the network can preserve information moving the other way. The moment Ethan actually died, Jack Baker provides one of the first clues. After Ethan defeats his mutated form, Ethan later experiences a calm vision of Jack inside a bright room. This Jack is not the violent father chasing him through walls. He speaks clearly, explains that Eveline took control of the family, and asks Ethan to free them. The scene implies that Jack's original consciousness still exists somewhere within the mold network, separated from the behavior Eveline imposes on his body, where the dead are stored. Resident Evil Village confirms the larger mechanism. Near the end, Eveline tells Ethan the truth. Jack killed him in the guest house. The mold infected his corpse and reconstructed it so completely that Ethan believed he was still an ordinary human. He retains his memories, personality, love for Mia, and ability to make terrible decisions around suspicious houses. If the rebuilt Ethan were only a mindless copy, the games never draw a clean line. From his own perspective, continuity is uninterrupted. He loses consciousness, wakes, and continues living. The mold has preserved the information that makes Ethan Ethan while replacing the biological structure carrying it. That is more than healing. Ordinary regeneration repairs damaged tissue according to a genetic template. Mold reconstruction appears capable of restoring memory and identity as part of the template. Ethan's durability throughout both games follows from that body. He can reattach severed limbs because the mold reconnects and rebuilds tissue. He survives injuries that should cause shock, infection, or blood loss. He uses first aid medicine as a trigger or aid for regeneration, not as a magical adhesive that turns human wrists into detachable accessories. But he still has limits. Lady Dimitrescu's attacks, Heisenberg's machinery, and Miranda's assault inflict accumulated damage. By the end of Village, Ethan's body begins crystallizing and breaking apart. The mold can preserve and repair him only while enough viable structure and energy remain. His final sacrifice destroys his active body near the Megamai seat. His consciousness does not completely disappear. Years later, Shadows of Rose sends Rose into the Megamai seat's stored realm. There she encounters a version of Ethan who protects her, guides her, and behaves consistently with the father who died. The downloadable story includes laboratory files that explain the mechanism more directly than the main games. The Megamai seat absorbs the memories of living things within its reach. Consciousnesses of the dead can remain preserved. People connected to the mold network can access a realm built from that stored information. But the realm is not a perfect replay of physical reality. Its environments are assembled from memory. Places can be incomplete, symbolic, or reorganized. Entities may be reconstructions. Time and distance do not behave normally. Only consciousnesses with sufficient affinity can preserve a stable sense of self. The file on recreation and manipulation of memory adds an even darker limitation. Stored consciousness can become diffuse, diluted, or mixed over time. Reassembling a person may produce flaws, so the Megamai set is not a flawless hard drive. It is a living archive where files can blend together, corrupt, and rewrite the folder structure while you are inside it. This is the weakness Miranda refuses to accept. She assumes that because Eva's memories are preserved, Eva can be restored exactly. But preserving information and restoring a person are not necessarily the same act. If the network reconstructs Eva and Rose's body, several questions remain. Would the result be the original Eva's continuous consciousness? Would it be a copy built from her memories? Would Rose's own mind be erased, merged, or trapped beside it? Would a consciousness stored for a century remain complete? Miranda treats these as technical details because grief has already chosen the conclusion. Her experiments are an attempt to force biology to validate that conclusion. The ceremony involving Rose appears to fail, and then partially succeed in a way Miranda did not expect. Rose is divided into crystallized flasks and later restored. Miranda attempts to use her as Eva's vessel, but Rose's power exceeds Miranda's control. Eva does not return. Miranda has spent more than a century sacrificing villagers, creating monsters, manipulating families, and preparing a body for a person who may never have existed inside the network in the exact form she imagined. That is the human horror behind the science. The mold's memory gives grief evidence without giving it certainty. It can produce a voice, it can produce a face, it can reproduce memories only the dead person should know. It still cannot answer whether bringing that information into a new body restores the life that was lost. Resident Evil wisely leaves some of that ambiguous. The games treat stored consciousness as real enough to communicate and influence events. Ethan inside the Megamai seat is not dismissed as a meaningless illusion. Eveline retains awareness after physical death. Miranda's consciousness persists in the stored realm and tries to manipulate Rose. At the same time, Shadows of Rose warns us that the realm is shaped by memory and that reconstruction is imperfect. Is it really still you? The safest conclusion is that the mold preserves a biologically encoded pattern of consciousness. That pattern can remain self-aware under the right conditions, interact with connected minds, and sometimes be embodied again. Whether philosophy grants it the original person's identity is a question the laboratory files cannot settle. Resident Evil has not proven a supernatural soul. it has created a biological system that makes the distinction between soul and data extremely uncomfortable. Eveline's role demonstrates another consequence of that system. She does not only control living infected hosts, she persists inside the network after Ethan destroys her physical body in Louisiana. When she appears to Ethan in Village, she knows what happened to him. She identifies his mold body and takes satisfaction in revealing it. This may be a stored Eveline consciousness speaking through the network, a manifestation assembled from Ethan's connection, or both. In a system where memories are shared biological information, the difference is not clean. Ethan's ignorance is itself remarkable. For 3 years after the Baker incident, he believes he is a normal survivor. He and Mia build a life under government protection. They have Rose. Chris Redfield's organization monitors them. Nobody clearly tells Ethan that his entire body has been replaced. He can pour medicine over impossible wounds, and still accepts that perhaps the pharmaceutical industry has improved. Part of this is Resident Evil logic. Part of it is the mold reproducing normal sensation and self-perception so convincingly that Ethan has no internal reason to doubt it. He eats, sleeps, feels pain, loves his family, and experiences fear. If every meaningful part of life continues, the material underneath becomes difficult to notice. That makes Ethan one of the series' strangest beings. He is not a human carrying an infection in the ordinary sense. He is a person whose consciousness remains continuous through a fungal reconstruction, and Rose may represent the next stage. She is born, not merely infected later. Her connection to the mold is part of her development. She can interact with the Megamycetes realm, resist other consciousnesses, absorb or suppress powers, and manifest abilities Miranda never achieved. Where Eveline was engineered to control a network, and Miranda tried to dominate it through research, Rose belongs to it without being entirely owned by it. That is why the government remains interested in her. A person who can access the archive may carry information from the dead, neutralize mold organisms, or become a biological weapon more powerful than Eveline. Rose wants none of that. She wants to stop being treated as a freak and understand the father she never knew. Inside the Megamycete, the network gives her the one thing no government program can: time with Ethan. Their meeting is emotionally real even if his body is not physical. That is the mold's gift and threat in one scene. It allows love to survive as information. It also ensures the dead may never be completely beyond reach. For Miranda, that possibility justifies possession. For Eveline, connection justifies forcing people into a family. For the connections, shared consciousness becomes a military control system. Every antagonist looks at the same network and sees a way to own somebody. Ethan uses it differently. He protects Rose without asking to inhabit her, replace her, or keep her inside the realm. He accepts his own death so she can return to her life. That is why his preserved consciousness feels like Ethan rather than a monster wearing his memories. The data reproduces the choice that defined him. The mold remembers bodies, but character is revealed by what the remembered person does. So how does it remember the dead? Before the final answer, there are 4 boundaries that keep this lore from turning into magic with mushrooms. The first is that infection happens in stages. Early exposure can improve healing and create a mental link before the victim understands what is happening. As fungal cells replace more tissue, Eveline gains greater influence. Hallucinations intensify. Violent behavior and physical mutation follow. At the most advanced stage, a host can lose independent identity almost completely. The Baker family shows several positions along that progression. Jack regenerates from enormous damage and becomes violently devoted to keeping Ethan inside the family. Marguerite controls insects and mutates into a reproductive fungal form. Zoe remains infected, but resists enough to seek a cure. Mia shifts between periods of control and periods where her own personality returns. Lucas appears unusually independent because the connections secretly give him a treatment that limits Eveline's control. He was deeply dangerous before infection, and chooses to cooperate with the organization, which means not every terrible thing at the Baker estate can be blamed on the girl downstairs. Dose, treatment, distance, biology, and individual resistance affect how much self remains accessible. That matters because the network is not simply copying a brain at the instant of death. Jack's calm consciousness appears separately from the violent behavior Eveline imposes on his body. The mold preserves an underlying pattern while Control changes what that pattern can do through infected tissue. The Bright Room scene in Resident Evil 7 establishes the language that Shadows of Rose later expands. Connected minds can meet in a mental environment. At first, the scene could be dismissed as Ethan hallucinating a conversation. Later games make preserved consciousness the stronger explanation. The series moves from images to voices to an explorable world assembled from accumulated memory. The second boundary is that the Louisiana mold and the village megamycete should not be treated as one giant wireless router with global coverage. They share a research lineage. The connections obtained fungal material and Eva's genetic information through Miranda. Evelyn's E-Series was developed from that work, but the E-Series weapon is engineered for infiltration and control, while the megamycete is an ancient root organism capable of absorbing vast amounts of information in one region. Evelyn creates a local network through infected hosts. The megamycete functions as a much larger archive. They demonstrate related principles at different scales, and the games never say every patch of black mold on Earth contains every dead character's memories. The third boundary is that the stored realm is not an objective recording. The files in Shadows of Rose describe memories of the dead remaining within the megamycete, and contaminated people connecting to it. They also warn that the realm does not strictly reflect physical reality. Rose enters replicas of Castle Dimitrescu and other places without traveling to them. Rooms are reorganized. Figures have obscured faces. Mannequins and masked enemies behave like symbolic fragments. Fear and memory are turned into architecture. It is less like watching security footage and more like entering a dream built from evidence. An entity inside that realm may be a preserved consciousness, a reconstruction from stored memories, the visitor's fear using familiar imagery, or several of those things mixed together. The archive does not put a helpful label above each apparition. One research file warns that consciousnesses can become diffuse, diluted, or mixed over time. Recreating a person from those fragments may introduce errors. Strong identities can remain coherent, while other information dissolves into the larger network. This explains why the mold can produce something emotionally convincing without guaranteeing perfect restoration. The fourth boundary is the difference between continuity and copying. Ethan's initial reconstruction resembles gradual replacement. Jack kills him, mold colonizes the body, and Ethan wakes with no experience of a second self being created. His active consciousness appears to continue while fungal material replaces the damaged biology. That is philosophically different from taking a dead person's stored memories years later and installing them into a new body. Miranda assumes both processes can lead to the same result. If Eva's memories exist in the megamycete, she believes a suitable vessel will restore Eva. But imagine the ceremony works exactly as planned. The new person looks like Eva, remembers Miranda, and says she is Eva. Is that Eva continuing after a century? Or a new consciousness built from Eva's information? From Miranda's perspective, the distinction disappears the moment the child calls her mother. From Rose's perspective, it is the difference between survival and erasure. That is why Miranda cannot ethically prove her theory. Any result that resembles Eva will satisfy the person running the experiment. Rose's existing identity is treated as interference inside a vessel. Miranda is not designing a test that can disprove her hope. She's designing a body that cannot refuse the conclusion. When Rose entered the archive, Shadows of Rose gives us stronger evidence that stored patterns can act, not merely replay. Miranda's preserved consciousness recognizes Rose, pursues goals, and adapts. Ethan's stored consciousness responds to his daughter, hides his identity, gives advice, and sacrifices himself again. Evelyn speaks with knowledge of Ethan's condition after her physical body is gone. These are not ordinary recordings. At minimum, the network can run a conscious pattern interactively. Whether that pattern possesses a supernatural soul is outside what the games establish. Resident Evil gives us biology with the functional properties people normally associate with haunting. The dead remain addressable. That creates military value too. The connections do not need Miranda's resurrection dream. An E-Series asset can infiltrate a household or organization, infect its members, read the emotional structure, and impose a new family hierarchy. Hallucinations can use faces and memories the victims already trust. Traditional bioorganic weapons announce themselves by entering through a wall. Eveline can make the people inside unlock the door for her. Her control is never perfect. Jack's original self can persist. Zoe can resist. Mia can recover. But even imperfect access to memory makes manipulation more precise. The target supplies the fear. The mold supplies the image. House Beneviento uses a related principle through infected plants and hallucinogenic pollen. Donna turns Ethan's grief, Mia's secrets, and his fear for Rose into the substance of the encounter. The giant infant is not frightening because a fungus understands babies academically. It is frightening because Ethan does. The network weaponizes what a mind brings into it. This gives Ethan's ordinary self-perception another explanation. His mold body hurts, heals, eats, sleeps, and feels human because human normality is part of the pattern it preserves. He cannot consciously shapeshift like Miranda. He does not control hosts like Eveline. His infection reconstructs the person he expects to be. He looks normal because the mold remembers normal too. Rose's relationship to it is different again. She's born from parents altered by mold, not merely infected during one attack. Her abilities develop as part of her body. She can enter the archive, resist other consciousnesses, manipulate mold structures, and retain herself against Miranda. Yet Rose initially wants those abilities removed. She has grown up being treated as dangerous, strange, or useful. A promised purifying crystal appeals to the most ordinary desire she has: stop being somebody else's biological question. Inside the archive, she discovers that removing the power is another manipulation. Miranda wants her abilities and her body. The Megamycete preserves predators as readily as it preserves parents. Memory is not moral. It stores the person willing to die for Rose and the person willing to erase Rose to recover somebody else. That is why Ethan's final act matters. He does not ask to occupy his daughter's body, keep her inside the realm, or use her as a path back to life. He accepts that his preserved existence is not more valuable than her future. Miranda sees memory as permission to possess. Ethan treats memory as one last chance to let go. What the mold really saves. The Megamycete functions as a fungal neural archive. It absorbs biological information, memories, and patterns of consciousness from organisms in its network. Related mold can connect infected brains, transmit hallucinations and commands, rebuild damaged hosts, and preserve minds after physical death. Those memories can generate environments and people inside a shared mental realm. Strong consciousnesses may remain coherent. Others can fade, mix, or be reconstructed imperfectly. It is not confirmed magic. It is not ordinary memory. It is biological storage so complete that death no longer guarantees deletion. And that may be more frightening than resurrection. A resurrected person returns to one body. A stored consciousness can be copied, edited, merged, placed inside a vessel, used to manipulate relatives, or kept accessible by whoever controls the network. Umbrella wanted ownership of flesh. The mold offers ownership of identity. Ethan survives that system because his memories reconstruct a man who still chooses his family. Miranda is destroyed by it because every stored memory becomes another excuse not to accept loss. The Megamycete remembers the dead. What it cannot tell us is whether remembering someone perfectly is the same as letting them live. And that uncertainty is not a missing piece the writers forgot to explain. It is the point. If the Megamycete only stored photographs, Miranda would obviously be wrong. If it restored a proven supernatural soul, she would have evidence. Instead, it produces the exact amount of personhood required to make grief dangerous. The stored dead can recognize you. They can respond. They can remember private experiences. They can still be incomplete. That is enough for somebody desperate to hear one familiar voice, and not enough to guarantee the voice belongs in a new body. It also reframes the entire Winter story. Ethan is not durable because he is secretly a conventional superhero. He is durable because his identity has become information a colony keeps rebuilding. His most human qualities survive inside something non-human. Eveline has the opposite problem. She has a human appearance and emotional need, but she was designed as a control system. She wants a family while possessing the biology that makes genuine family impossible, because nobody connected to her can freely choose the relationship. Rose inherits both sides of that legacy. She can connect without automatically controlling, preserve Ethan without becoming him, and leave the archive instead of living inside its grief? The mold remembers the dead because information is one of the things it consumes. The people who study it keep assuming information can be owned. Ethan's story argues that memory only remains human when it can choose not to own the living. That may be the cleanest difference between storage and legacy. Miranda wants Eva stored so completely that the past can overwrite Rose. Ethan leaves Rose memories that help her live without asking her to become him. The same biological archive supports both possibilities. That means the danger is not only what the mold remembers, it is who receives permission to retrieve, edit, and embody the memory. In the hands of a grieving parent, it becomes resurrection research. In the hands of a weapons company, it becomes mind control. For Rose, it becomes a conversation she can leave. The exit is what makes it love instead of possession.